let's talk about this other book. So I was at a book fair this past, a holiday thing, and I picked up this book, Political Class Dismissed by James Ostrowski. And I think, uh, just as somebody that's been involved kind of in politics in Buffalo and maybe a kind of contrarian thinker in a lot of ways, but common sense in a lot of other ways. Um, James Ostrowski, he's somebody that multiple people have told me that I need to talk with or get in touch with because we have some overlaps in thinking. And I did meet him briefly, and it was, we talked a lot about my personal situation. But yeah, I got this book, and I think one of the things that I was excited when I picked up this book was there was a section here on what's wrong with Buffalo, a Rothbardian analysis. So he's got a whole chapter here where he talks about Buffalo politics and what's wrong with Buffalo. And again, this is another dense reading that I've just got through. But one of the sections that right away here caught my eye was this section on the political machine. So I want to do a brief reading from this. So it says, it didn't take long for a close observer of Buffalo politics to realize that the real power in government was actually outside the government. Real power, at least in local politics, was held by the county Democratic chairman, affectionately known as the boss. The boss was always a lawyer, usually Irish, who often held some well-paying part-time board position with light duties. The boss and his troops were responsible for installing the mayor and other public officials. So on big decisions, machine politicians would take their directions from the boss. If they weren't the types to take such direction, they wouldn't have made it that far in the first place. In theory, the boss was democratically elected by county committeemen, elected by voters of the same party. In reality, they didn't call him boss for nothing. The boss was essentially an autocrat. Like any autocrat, he had allies and constituencies to please, and sometimes even superiors to answer to, his big money contributors. However, in general, and on most matters, he called the shots and everyone else aimed accordingly. They did so willingly because they perceived that, by all members of the political machine working together under the direction of one man, their collective political power would be maximized. Excuse me. That's why they call it a machine. A similar managerial principle allowed Caesar, leading 50,000 well-disciplined troops, to defeat 250,000 Gauls in 52 BC at Alesia. In Buffalo, the relatively small but highly disciplined and motivated machine was consistently able to impose its will on the disorganized and demoralized masses. So, right there, that's a reading from, Political Class Dismissed by James Ostrowski. And I think that section spoke to me in a lot of ways as somebody that's been thinking through, right, local politics, my role in local politics, and also, my experience as someone that was, I was fired from City Hall. I've done some recordings on that for anyone that's interested. But yeah, I've interfaced with the machine, and especially the section there about the Democratic committeeman or the commissioner or the boss. And I think, it's something that's still an issue today. I don't have my pulse on exactly how powerful, the boss is, but I know one issue that's concerning to me is the fact that the Erie County Democratic Commissioner is also the Erie County Board of Elections Commissioner. So you have the Democratic Chairman who's also, the Board of Elections Commissioner. And obviously I think anyone with common sense sees that that's clearly a conflict of interest. If you have someone that's the head of, in Buffalo, the only political party on one hand is also then the one who's running the elections, you can see how, that is an inherent conflict of interest. And it's one thing I don't fully understand how that came to be. I'm not stupid, so I know that that's not an accident, but also just that it's so embedded, right? It's out in the open there, and it's right for all the threat to democracy kind of chance. What's more of a threat to democracy than having, the person running the region's only political party also running the elections? And I think one example that my personal experience is that I had this letter of, so last election, and I did actually try running for the Democratic Committee. And for those that don't know, Democratic Committee is just essentially the city's broken up into different election districts. And each little district. So there's 9 county districts, but then within each county district, that's districts broken up to many other little units. And each of those units, or I think they're called technically wards, which I learned through my experience of running, each of those wards gets a representative to serve on the Erie County Democratic Committee, and then they represent, or they get, a vote that's weighted to how many constituents are in that ward. So I ran for, and this is important too because we're in a time when regionally, locally, we're in the middle of this giant game of political musical chairs, right? We've had so many, I think at this moment in time, or I guess right now it's post-election, but right before this election, I was not represented by anyone that was actually elected by the people, because you had, just recently you had our U.S. Congressperson, Brian Higgins, decided, in the middle of a 2-year term that he no longer wanted to be congressman anymore, so he resigned to take a job at Shays. That led our New York state senator, to then running unopposed and being elected congressman in a separate election. So then that vacated the state senator seat, and then you had our mayor, mayor of the city of Buffalo, recently resigned. So we have no technical mayor, but an acting mayor. And you just have this political machine, and then when you're not having these regular elections, it's often the local Erie County Democratic Committee who then appoints people to these chairs that then run unopposed. And I think my experience, I tried running for the ward that I live in. So, and that's the weird thing is, like, to be a committeeman, you could live in one district but represent a district on the other side of town. So you're not constrained by the district you live in. But I chose, my ward, which is a very small ward. I think there was 90 registered voters. So I did it strategically. One, because, I ran for the Buffalo Fillmore District 16 ward, which is a very small ward. So I figured, one, this is where I live. I want to represent the people that where I live. And also I thought it was a smaller ward, so I wouldn't get much pushback from the establishment of running there, because technically, because there's so few residents, 90 residents in the ward, I wouldn't have that big of a vote when it came to committee votes. But yeah, that was my first experience with the machine, because in this time too, this was April, I had gone on a vacation, but I got back and I had this notification from the Erie County Board of Elections, and the Erie County Board of Elections, and it's addressed from the commissioners, Rolf M. Moore and Jeremy J. Zellner. So Jeremy J. Zellner, he's addressing him here as the commissioner of the Board of Elections, but he's also the chairman of the Democratic Party, or as the political class just miscalled, the boss. So this is the letter I got from the Erie County Democratic Committee. So it says, this is notification that a petition filed designating you as a candidate for the above office has been preliminarily disqualified due to the following reasons: insufficient number of signatures. If you would like to review the Board of Elections findings and your eligibility as candidate, you must contact our office no later than 5 p.m. and to schedule a hearing with the commissioners. And then it says the termination will be made final on April 29th. In the request, you do not request a hearing. The termination by the Board of Elections will be final, and you will not be a candidate on the specified party line. So yeah, I did not end up appealing. I think at this point in April, I was just kind of burnt out from politics. I mean, I had the experience of having the police sent to my house. I was just in a mental state, whereas I just kind of lost the will to push it anymore. And especially this time, this was more an eye-opening experience. I think, especially to the way that so I was disqualified because someone in my ward petitioned, they objected to my petition. And it was weird because I have a ward of 90 people. So I was like, who in my own district would oppose me running when there's no other candidates running? So it ended up being someone on my street. And then I did a little research on who this person was. So this person essentially looked like they were friends with my council member's assistant, or one of the staffers in my council member's office, got them to object to my petition. So they sent me a certified mail saying they objected to my petition. And essentially I did make a mistake on my signature. So I only needed, you only need 5% of the electorate to sign your petition to get on the ballot. So in my ward of roughly 90 people, I only needed 6 signatures or 5 signatures, 6 to be safe. So I submitted 2 pages of 6 signatures to get 12 signatures. And I did leave, my fatal error was that I left a blank. So at the bottom, right, there's, the top, when I messed up the ward film. So like in the real world, they call it the Fillmore Council District. So on my petition, I wrote that I'm running for, Fillmore District 16 Ward, but in election terms, the council district is not called a district, it's called a ward. So technically I was running for the Fillmore Ward District 16. So that was one error. I flipped the fill and the 16 around. And the also fatal error was nothing to do with my signatures, but at the bottom there's a bunch of fine print. There's a blank in the print above your signature where you're supposed to write in how many signatures are on the page. So although I had 6 signatures on each page, I did not put a number 6 in the blank ballot. I think that invalidated. And so technically I submitted 2 petitions with 0 signatures because although I had signatures on the page that were valid voters, they did not have I did not count them. And they do that because in, elections where there might be thousands and thousands of signatures, it's easier to count there. But so yeah, again, I think it's just an illumination of this, this book, The Political Class, because you have the Democratic commissioner in my case, who, right, is the board of commissioner. So, and my perception too is that, right, the Democratic committee does not want me in the room. I do not. They'd rather my district have no representatives than me representing my district because, one, I think I don't have a good relationship with my council member. I could get into that a little bit, but briefly, the person that fired me from City Hall is also a good friend of his and has donated to both him and his partner's political campaigns. So there's one, and then it just doesn't. That's kind of the culture downtown is don't represent people that you might not. Yeah, I'm not part of the club, right? So they'd rather have my seat be vacant with no votes than have, little Fillmore 16 have any sort of voice on in their committee. And you've seen this recently with the mayor's elections, the forums where it's not open to the public; it's only committee men. Yeah, just a real life example. And this was right. I'm glad that I ran for my ward because it's like, oh, that's how I understand it now, right? I've had friends too say, oh, I tried running and I got knocked off, but this is my own experience, and it's good to have a little experience in your belt because you see, oh, that's how they do it. They find the one person in your neighborhood who's friends with the machine, and they get that person to object to your petition. They have perfect information because the county, as soon as you communicate or interface with the board of elections, as soon as you do that, the Democratic committee instantly knows because the person running the Democratic committee is the commissioner. So it's really hard. 1, 2, if you try to do any sort of ask for any FOIL, any information. The Democratic Party is essentially kind of operating with the board of elections since it's the same person running the 2. And that's just my perceptions. I could be wrong. Maybe Chairman and Commissioner Zellner is able to, split himself and do them both objectively. But again, in a region of almost over 1 million people, why can't we just have 2 people do those 2 jobs? And just a good example, I think we're in a moment here too, which is interesting because, the mayor's race, right? I think, that's a big race that's coming up. And, I think the Erie County Democrats have their preferred candidates. And, obviously when you're the head of your party is also running the board of elections, it's easier to steal or steer that outcome there to the candidate that you prefer. So, just another kind of reading of Political Class Dismissed with my own personal experience or antidote to the boss, because I think just my my experience, right, just being disqualified, it's it's good data. And so it's something I thought about is, how the machine, and I'm glad to get deeper into this book, Political Class Dismissed, because I think a lot of my experience, I think the author here just has similar, as someone that kind of feels like I'm civically involved, I'm civically engaged, but also not allowed to participate in my government because of politics. And we'll see. So I think that's something that just a good application of the real world